And so a related concept to scaling is this concept of elasticity, right? You'll hear, especially with AWS, they tend to have everything's elastic. They have elastic databases and elastic computes and elastic storage. What is elastic, right? The elastic element is that the system can automatically grow and shrink based on the application's demand. So the rubber band aspect. And so we had that graph when we said about scaling, where we have a maximum capacity, where you have an increasing user demand over time, and that failure point, okay? But if your application was elastic, then the capacity can grow. And so as your demand grows, capacity raises to meet it, right? And then when the demand eventually shrinks, as it normally does, then the capacity shrinks back down. That is an elastic system. Auto scaling. And you'll see the capacity is sort of staggered. It's got steps, not smooth. Because typically when you have 4 servers and then you add a 5th server, the growth in capacity is not smooth. It's you've just increased your capacity 20%. And then you add a couple more servers, you've increased your capacity another 20%. So capacity tends to, come in bursts essentially. And so this elastic thing, the requirement for that is the system can detect when it's getting busy and add more resources when it is. And because we're in the cloud, it's cheaper. You'll end up saving a lot of money because your system is elastic. Now, it's important to understand where these failure points can happen, right? So when we're talking about availability and we're saying, why isn't it 100? Why can't you just install an application into a server and it runs? Why? Well, the thing is, we're living in the world of computers and hardware fails, right? You have a home computer. Sometimes your power supply dies. Sometimes your hard drive dies. Sometimes the memory goes wonky. That just happens. Hardware erodes over time. Those connections get a thing. There's a little bit of corrosion going on. Dust gets in there. Hardware fails. We live also in this world where, your regional elements are out of your control, right? There could be a storm, a flood, power outage. I'm old enough to remember when the whole east coast of the US and Canada were down, no electricity for a day. And, that stuff happens, and it's hard to keep your data center running when everything else around you is out of power, right? So your batteries only last for so long, and the gas and stuff lasts for so long. But if the internet's down, the internet's down. We also suffer internet outages where traffic starts to fail, packets are being dropped, routers have gone bad. It happens. Now, we're also at the mercy of these cloud providers for their own deployments and their own software, right? We're running our software, but they're also running their software. So it does happen that Microsoft Azure will deploy something to a region, and that was just some unexpected thing happened, a bad deployment. They have to roll it back. We don't forget, we live in a world of security, and we have to patch Windows sometimes. We have to patch our software. Microsoft has to patch their own Azure operating system. Things need updates. And so that requires a reboot sometimes, and that requires a downtime. So downtime happens in a lot of unplanned ways and also even in planned ways, which are the updates. To get that high availability, if you want that 99.999%, what about your own code? What about your own app? How are you going to deploy version 2 of your app without taking down version 1? Well, there are technologies for that, like Service Fabric. You can deploy version 2 of something and it'll just switch over with no downtime for users. But that's something that's intentional, thoughtful, planned in advance. It's not by default. But how can you update the database, add a column, remove a column, change the structure of something while your application is still running? All those sorts of things. Don't forget, we live in a dangerous world where denial of service attacks are a thing. People can go to your application and send a million visits at the same time to it, and all of your infrastructure, even if you're elastic and scalable, gets overwhelmed. Your load balancer gets overwhelmed, the incoming stuff gets overwhelmed, and existing customers suffer. Also, just mistakes happen, right? You can accidentally check in some code that's not complete, missing a file, and hit that deployment switch, and suddenly you're on production. It's happened to all of us. It'll happen, continue to happen. I remember even with AWS happened once where somebody was entering a command line. They were trying to remove an item from a routing table, but they didn't specify the IP address range properly. They made a typo, if you will, hit enter, and the AWS engineer wiped out the routing table. And AWS Eastern Region was down for 6 hours because of a human error. It happens. So I'm trying to bring this home here. Azure goes down, AWS goes down, Google goes down. Every major cloud provider has their moments where they have some sort of operation. Hopefully not frequent, but you need to design your applications to keep running during these things. You don't, I mean, I guess if it's a priority to you, you need to. How do you design your app? If Azure Eastern Region goes down, how do your app continue to run? Well, there are ways to do that. I'm not going to cover that during this intro here. We're still in the intro section to this course, but attaining high availability, it's an architectural problem. There are solutions for it all the time. These companies, including Azure, coming out with improvements. So Azure Front Door Service was just released last couple of months. That's an improvement to the way that these things happen and can be managed on a regional level. Related to these things of scalability and keeping availability, keeping it running, what happens if it does go down, right? You got keeping it running on one side. The flip side of the same coin is being able to recover from failure. And the two questions that are the key questions for recovering is, what's an acceptable amount of downtime? Okay, so let's say you're down for an hour and it was a disaster. And is that acceptable? And let's say it's not. Let's say you're like, no, we need to be up and running within 5 minutes. Well, how much data would you be willing to lose? To get that up and running in 5 minutes, you need to have your data backed up and stored in alternative locations and accessible from those locations. And so how often are you doing backups? Are you doing backups every 5 minutes? Are you doing backups constantly? Is it a constant synchronization? And so these things are part of disaster recovery. So I wanted to wrap up this introductory section here to talk about where we're at. Okay, so I started off this section talking about the continuum of knowledge, where you're starting from the beginning, you've got no knowledge, very little knowledge of what cloud computing is, what Azure is. And you can go all the way through to the expert level where you're ready to take and pass the exam and you pass it with a great score, and even beyond, right? There's more to Azure than even beyond what is tested at the expert certification level. But I wanted to get people to sort of like a little bit farther down the continuum from the beginner level, at least into this novice level. Like I said, it wasn't my plan to get you to pass the fundamentals exam, but if you take what I just did and go and take an AZ900 course and go and take an AZ900 exam, you might be pretty far ready for that. But so hopefully we got a little bit farther down that continuum. Now I need to warn you, right? Azure is huge. There is a lot to learn. You're going to feel overwhelmed by this. You know, there are hundreds of videos to go through, and not even only that, but hundreds of topics and hundreds of services. If you look at the compute options that we reviewed, there are 8 or 10 different ways of executing code in Azure. Database options, there's 8 or 10 different database options. Storage options, networking options, load balancing options, how to achieve high availability, etc., 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 etc. So Azure is actually huge, and it's very difficult in any kind of course, to be honest, to convey expert level knowledge in hundreds of areas. So there is a lot. Now, think about what your job is. If your job is to become an Azure architect and start designing solutions for Azure, well, then your job revolves around the question of why. Okay. We do need to understand all of the Azure options, all of the offerings. So there is this broad level of knowledge in terms of what is available. But why? Why would you choose out of those 10 compute options between web apps and VMs, of serverless model with functions and service fabric? Why would you choose one over the other? All of them have pros and cons. There are cost implications, there's performance implications, control implications, and the expert level knowledge required, etc. So all of these things have pros and cons, and our jobs as architects ultimately is to understand what's available and why you would choose one over the other. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about is how does this work and why would you choose it? Now you'll find if you're interested in getting into the exams in terms of Azure architecture exams, that there are how elements to it. So it's not just why, right? So Microsoft is going to ask you to create a VM, not just understand why you would want to create a VM, but they're going to say, go ahead and do it. So we do need to go deeper than just the why. Also, I believe in terms of learning, this is going to help you. So doing is actually better than hearing. It's actually better than seeing someone do it, doing it yourself. And so my intention and my hope is that you're going to, not in this section, but when we get into various talking about databases and virtual machines and web apps, that you're going to go and do it. You're going to say, oh, well, I'm going to go and try to create a web app and see how easy or how hard it was. Okay, so doing is better than seeing and listening when it comes to learning. I want to end with sort of with my approach. Okay, I'm not here to sort of preach at you, but I do want to encourage you. I want to encourage you to not be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of Azure. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to look something up. Go do a search in your favorite search engine. Microsoft has a great docs website, documents, and so their help website is fantastic. Or try it yourself, right? You don't need to ask me to, what happens when you try to create 2 web apps with the same name. Well, go and create a web app and then create a second web app with the same name and see what happens. So that this is the great thing about Azure. It's cheap or free to do certain things, and you will see for yourself. And that's, I think, you'll learn better than if I told you and I looked it up and I answered the question. Okay, so don't be afraid of Azure, and don't be afraid to go and explore with it and play with it and expand your own understanding. My final philosophy, I put resourcefulness wins, and I'm going to put that on its own slide here. This is not just for Azure. It's not just for this course, but for every course you'll ever take. I think this is true for your career. I think this is true for anything. If you are presented with a problem, there are 2 types of people. If you're presented with a problem and you stop and you wait until someone comes along and helps you, that is less than ideal. Okay, you are not going to go as far as the person who's presented with a problem and solves it, goes around it, goes under it, goes through it, destroys it. Okay, so there's no brick wall. It's only in your mind. So resourcefulness wins, not only with this course, not only with Azure, but with everything. Now, that's hopefully the only preachiness part of this whole thing. But I want to encourage you to be resourceful and to not let anything stop you. If I have a video coming up and it doesn't quite get into enough detail from something that you're really interested in, don't let that stop you. Go find it and go deeper. Okay, resourcefulness wins. Thanks.